Jennifer Gledhill was young, bright, and loved by her students, yet one ordinary morning, she vanished into thin air, leaving behind a locked car, her belongings untouched, and a trail of unanswered questions that would unravel into one of the most chilling cases her town had ever faced. Jennifer Gledhill's life had always seemed steady and predictable, a picture of stability in the eyes of her friends, family, and colleagues. At 27 years old, she had carved out a respected role as a local elementary school teacher in her suburban town. She was known for her gentle way with children, the kind of teacher who went beyond the syllabus, who saw each child as more than just a name on a register. Her neighbors often saw her leaving her modest home early in the morning, carrying books under her arm, smiling politely before getting into her car. It was a routine everyone knew by heart, a rhythm so constant that when it broke, the silence was louder than any alarm. On the morning of September 12th, Jennifer followed her usual pattern. The sun was still low in the sky, painting the streets in shades of gold. She left her house dressed neatly, with a travel mug of coffee in one hand and her bag slung over her shoulder. There was nothing unusual, nothing rushed or distracted about her manner. Later, her roommate would recall hearing the door close softly, the sound blending seamlessly into the hum of another ordinary day. Yet that morning would be the last time anyone in her circle would see her alive. By mid-morning, school office began to notice her absence. Jennifer was always punctual, often the first to arrive to prepare lessons and tidy the classroom. Before her students filed in, and the clock edged past 8:30, the time her first class began, a sense of unease crept in. Phone calls were made, first to her mobile, then to her home, but there was no answer. Her voicemail picked up, cheerful and familiar, but unsettling in its emptiness. At first, colleagues assumed traffic or a sudden emergency. Hours later, when she still hadn't shown, worry deepened into something heavier. Police were contacted by early afternoon. It began with what seemed like the most logical step, retracing her path from home to school. It was only a 5-minute drive, a stretch of quiet suburban streets, punctuated with shops, a cafe, and the usual traffic signals. By evening, officers found her car parked only 2 blocks from the school. It was locked and neatly positioned along the curb, as if placed there deliberately. Inside sat her purse, her phone, and her keys, resting in plain view. There was no shattered glass, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. It looked as if she had simply parked, stepped out, and vanished before reaching the school. Doors dot the small discoveries inside the vehicle, unsettled investigators more than they reassured them. Jennifer was known for being cautious and responsible. Friends emphasized that she would never leave her purse or phone unattended, not even for a short walk. The car appeared frozen in time, like a snapshot of a life interrupted mid-step. Questions swirled in every direction. Had she met someone she knew on the way to work? Had she been lured into another car? Or had something darker happened within those 2 short blocks of daylight? As night fell, the first waves of panic began to ripple through her family. Jennifer's parents arrived in town, their faces pale, with disbelief, insisting that something was terribly wrong. Flyers were quickly printed, bearing her smiling photograph. Volunteers from the neighborhood joined in late-night searches, scouring alleys, checking abandoned buildings, and calling her name into the dark. Police dogs were brought in, sniffing the area around the parked car, but the trail seemed to vanish into nothing just beyond it. The town itself felt changed overnight. Streets once considered safe suddenly seemed filled with shadows. Parents clutched their children's hands a little tighter on the way to school. Conversations in grocery lines and church gatherings circled endlessly back to Jennifer. A young woman, with everything ahead of her, had disappeared in broad daylight, leaving behind only a locked car and unanswered questions. For investigators, it marked the beginning of a case that would haunt them for months. For the community, it marked the end of innocence. It's a chilling reminder that safety was never as certain as they believed. The hours after Jennifer's disappearance turned into days, and with each passing sunrise, the sense of dread seemed to thicken. Authorities wasted no time launching a full-scale search. Patrol cars circled the blocks around the school and her neighborhood, while helicopters scanned from above. The police worked quickly to gather volunteers, and soon hundreds of people fanned out across the town. Armed with flashlights, maps, and a determination to bring her home. Parks, wooded trails, and even drainage ditches were inspected with meticulous care, but every effort ended in disappointment. No new trace of Jennifer surfaced flyers, with her smiling face multiplied overnight. Taped 2 lampposts, pinned on community boards, and handed out at gas stations and bus stops. They showed the image of a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair, a soft smile, and bright, trusting eyes. Posters carried the simple, chilling word at the top: missing. 4 residents who passed them each day. Sight became both familiar and unbearable. It was a reminder that somewhere, somehow, a neighbor had vanished into silence, and no one had any answers. Detectives began piecing together the last known movements of Jennifer. Surveillance footage from the streets near her school confirmed her car entering the area just before 8 in the morning. She had followed her usual route without deviation. Yet after that, she seemed to disappear from the lens of every camera. The school's security system showed no sign of her entering the building. Even nearby stores and businesses with exterior cameras revealed nothing. It was as if she had walked out of her car and stepped directly into a void as the investigation intensified. The search widened beyond town limits. The surrounding forests and farmland were combed carefully, but the land stretched vast and empty. Teams of divers searched rivers and lakes, looking for any trace that the missing woman might have ended up in the water. Cadaver dogs sniffed the grounds for scents, sometimes pulling handlers in promising directions, only for the trail to end abruptly with no answers. Each day ended with weary volunteers trudging back, exhausted. While the unanswered question grew heavier, how could someone disappear so completely in broad daylight? Her family clung to hope but struggled to hide their fear. They stood before news cameras pleading for information, their voices breaking as they described Jennifer's character, her gentle nature, and the absence that had torn a hole in their lives. The community rallied around them, holding candlelight vigils where crowds gathered, holding photos and candles, whispering prayers for her safe return. Yet, as the vigils grew, so too did the rumors. Some whispered of a stalker, others speculated about a stranger passing through town, and a few wondered if someone close to Jennifer had secrets they were hiding. Detectives carefully interviewed everyone in her life. They spoke with her colleagues at the school, who all described her as reliable and well-liked. Friends admitted she had been under some stress, balancing work and her relationship, but none believed she would ever vanish voluntarily. The boyfriend became a central figure of interest. Investigators studied his timeline, his phone records, and his statements. While his alibi appeared strong, doubt lingered, fueled by whispers of arguments and disagreements. Police also questioned a fellow teacher who had clashed with Jennifer over curriculum decisions. The disagreements were minor, but with little else to go on. Every lead mattered. Despite their efforts, each trail turned cold. No evidence pointed to a struggle, no ransom notes appeared, and no digital trace suggested she had planned to run away. The absence of clues became its own mystery. Detectives found themselves standing on empty streets near her car, staring at the space where Jennifer should have been, and realizing they had nothing solid to pursue. The community that once thrived on routine now lived under a cloud of suspicion and fear. Children were no longer allowed to walk to school alone. Neighbors eyed one another with quiet mistrust. Every unfamiliar car that passed down a street was watched closely. The town had lost not only a young woman but also its sense of safety. The search for Jennifer continued, but beneath the surface. An unspoken worry began to spread that this was not just a disappearance, but something far darker waiting to be uncovered. As the days bled into weeks, the investigation began to change shape. With no new physical evidence surfacing, suspicion shifted from unknown strangers to the people in Jennifer's inner circle. Detectives knew from experience that in cases like this, the answers often lay closer than anyone wanted to believe. They started by mapping out her personal relationships, drawing lines between her family, her friends, her colleagues, and her boyfriend. Each connection was examined in detail. Every conversation and argument weighed for hidden meaning. Her boyfriend, Daniel, quickly became the focus of community whispers. He had been with Jennifer for nearly 2 years, and from the outside, their relationship appeared stable. But close friends confided that tension had been building. Jennifer had wanted to move forward, to share a home, perhaps even begin planning for a future together, while Daniel had hesitated, citing financial worries and the pressure of commitment. Those disagreements had led to sharp words, sometimes overheard by neighbors. Detectives pressed Daniel about their last interactions, about whether he had seen her on the morning she disappeared. He insisted he had not, offering an alibi that placed him at work. Phone records confirmed his location, yet investigators could not shake the unease that his calmness seemed rehearsed. Attention soon turned to Jennifer's colleagues at the school. One in particular, a fellow teacher named Mark, had caught the investigators' eye. Reports of heated discussions between him and Jennifer had surfaced. The disputes were small in scale differences over teaching methods, the use of certain classroom materials, but the bitterness in their exchanges stood out. Mark denied any involvement and expressed shock at the accusations. His alibi was also firm. He had been in a staff meeting at the exact time Jennifer went missing, surrounded by witnesses. Still, the shadow of suspicion lingered around him. If only because the case lacked other promising leads. The detectives combed through Jennifer's digital life, searching her phone records, emails, and social media for signs of hidden struggles. They discovered late-night messages to a friend, describing how she felt watched while walking home on certain evenings. She hadn't elaborated, brushing it off as nerves or coincidence, but the words struck investigators as haunting in hindsight. She had attracted the attention of someone unknown, someone who noticed her routines and waited for the right moment. That single line opened a new thread of possibility. Perhaps Jennifer had not been taken by someone she knew, but by someone who had been silently observing. Meanwhile, her family's grief deepened with each day of uncertainty. Her parents, exhausted from media interviews and endless vigils, tried to hold themselves together in front of cameras. They avoided pointing fingers publicly, but privately, suspicion seeped into conversations. Every detail of Jennifer's relationships was dissected. Every person who had spoken to her in the days before her disappearance questioned repeatedly. The lack of answers left them restless, unable to grieve, unable to hope. Detectives also began to explore the possibility of Jennifer leaving on her own. It was a theory the family rejected outright, insisting she would never abandon her students, her family, or her commitments. Financial records showed no unusual withdrawals. Her passport remained untouched in a drawer at home. There were no secret bookings for travel, no signs of hidden debts or secret lives. The evidence firmly contradicted any idea of a voluntary disappearance. As weeks turned into months, frustration mounted. Each lead seemed to end in a dead end. Surveillance cameras in the area were studied again and again, but no new clues emerged. The neighborhood near her school had been canvassed multiple times, yet no witness had come forward with useful information. The case grew colder, but the unease in the town only deepened. Parents held their children tighter, locking doors that once stayed open, watching the streets with new suspicion. Jennifer's absence had left a hole in the heart of the community. Yet beneath the grief and fear was a growing realization that someone was responsible. Whether it was someone familiar or a shadow hiding in the background, the truth was still out there, waiting to surface. The silence around Jennifer's disappearance was deafening. Investigators knew silence often meant secrets waiting to be uncovered. 3 months after Jennifer vanished, the investigation had slowed to a crawl. Leads were exhausted, and the detectives assigned to her case admitted quietly among themselves that the trail had gone cold. Her family still begged for answers. Her students left drawings and letters on her empty desk at school and the town, carried the weight of a story that seemed destined to remain unfinished. But in early December, everything changed when a hiker, exploring a remote trail outside town, noticed something odd. The ground near a cluster of trees looked disturbed, as if soil had been turned recently. At first it seemed unremarkable, the kind of erosion that comes with heavy rain. Yet as the hiker walked closer, his eyes caught a flash of color beneath the mud. Half buried was a shoe, caked in dirt, but still intact. When authorities examined it, they realized the significance almost instantly. It was a women's running shoe, and inside the faded fabric was a small initial written in marker. JG. The shoe belonged to Jennifer. Forensic analysis confirmed it beyond doubt. The discovery electrified the investigation, giving it new momentum after months of stagnation. Within days, cadaver dogs were brought to the site, their handlers tense, as the animals sniffed the air and pulled in one direction, deeper into the woods. The officers followed, hearts pounding, knowing that the trail might lead them to the truth. But dreading what that truth would look like, the dogs led the search party about half a mile from the initial discovery, stopping near a secluded hollow. Surrounded by trees, the ground there looked uneven, as if someone had dug in haste. Shovels broke the earth, and soon the sickening reality emerged, a shallow grave hidden beneath the forest floor. What they uncovered was human remains, decomposed, yet still identifiable through the belongings buried alongside. Clothing fragments, jewelry, and dental records confirmed what everyone had feared: Jennifer had been found. The missing persons case had just shifted into a homicide investigation. The news spread through town like wildfire, shattering the last fragile hopes that Jennifer might return alive. Vigils turned into memorials, and grief hung heavy in every conversation. For her family, the discovery brought answers but not relief. They had spent months clinging to the belief that she might still be out there, waiting to be rescued. That possibility was gone, replaced with a haunting certainty. The gentle, promising life of their daughter had been brutally cut short. And somewhere out there, her killer remained free. Detectives now had a crime scene to dissect. They documented every inch of the grave, collected soil samples, bagged clothing, and combed the surrounding woods for further evidence. Their efforts paid off when fragments of tape were found near the site, suggesting Jennifer had been restrained. Small traces of biological material were recovered from her clothing. These samples were rushed to the lab, and investigators waited, with a mixture of dread and anticipation for the results. For months, the case had been little more than speculation and blind searching. Now, they finally had something tangible evidence that could point to the person responsible. As the investigation expanded, detectives reconstructed the timeline of her final moments. They believed Jennifer had been taken shortly after leaving her car, forced into another vehicle, and driven out of town. The choice of location suggested familiarity with the area. It wasn't a spot easily found by accident. It was remote, shielded by thick woods and far from well-traveled roads. Whoever had placed her there knew the land well enough to believe the grave would remain undisturbed. That detail narrowed the possibilities. It was less likely to have been a random stranger passing through, and more likely someone local. Someone who blended into the fabric of the community while carrying a terrible secret. For the town, the revelation was a shock, but for the investigators, it was the turning point they had been waiting for. After months of dead ends, they now had a body, physical evidence, and the chilling knowledge that Jennifer had not simply disappeared. She had been taken, held, and killed. The sense of urgency surged back into the investigation, doubled their efforts. Determined to unmask the person who had stolen Jennifer's life and left her buried beneath the forest floor, the truth was finally within reach. But it was a truth more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The forensic results arrived weeks after Jennifer's body was discovered, and they changed everything. DNA taken from her clothing pointed to a man. Few in the community would have suspected a handyman named Richard Hale. He was a quiet figure who had lived in the area for years, drifting between odd jobs repairing fences, fixing roofs, and clearing out basements. His record wasn't spotless. He had minor arrests for burglary and assault, but nothing that had ever marked him as dangerous enough to commit murder. He had worked on projects near the school during the same week Jennifer vanished, which explained how he could have known her routines. Detectives began to see a chilling picture. Foreman, ordinary man who had slipped beneath notice, hiding violent impulses behind the mask of everyday life. Investigators delved into Richard's past and uncovered troubling patterns. Women in nearby towns had reported being followed late at night, A few described strange encounters with a man offering unwanted help with car troubles or home repairs. None of these incidents had been tied to him at the time, but in hindsight, the similarities were undeniable. He had a predatory way of studying people, learning their habits, waiting until they were most vulnerable. Jennifer, with her predictable morning schedule and her car parked in the same spot each day, had become his target. Detectives pieced together the likely sequence of events. On the morning of September 12th, Richard had been working near the school grounds. He would have seen Jennifer park her car and begin walking toward the building. Somewhere in that short distance, he intercepted her, possibly under the pretense of offering assistance or asking a simple question. In those brief, crucial moments, he managed to force her into his vehicle without drawing attention. The daylight, the nearby houses, the routine of morning traffic had provided a false sense of safety. He drove her out of town to the wooded trail, where her life was taken and hastily buried beneath shallow soil. When detectives confronted Richard, he denied everything at first, claiming he had never met Jennifer. But the DNA evidence was undeniable, and when combined with cell tower data, placing him near the wooded trail on the day she disappeared, the case against him grew unshakable. Slowly, under mounting pressure, Richard began to unravel. He admitted to seeing Jennifer that morning, but insisted her death was not planned. He painted himself as someone who acted on impulse, though investigators suspected he had been watching her for weeks. His words shifted blame away from himself, yet the reality was clear. He had ended a life without remorse. The arrest shocked the town. People who had hired Richard to fix their gutters or paint their porches were horrified to learn the truth. He had been inside their homes, drinking coffee at their tables, smiling politely as he worked. The thought that such a man had been moving freely through their lives left many uneasy, questioning how well they truly knew the people around them. Jennifer's family sat through the trial, listening to the grim details, each revelation reopening the wound that had barely begun to heal. The courtroom was filled with quiet outrage as prosecutors laid out the timeline, the evidence, and the chilling reality of how ordinary circumstances had been twisted into horror. In the end, Richard was convicted of kidnapping and murder, sentenced to life without parole. Justice was served in the legal sense, but for those who loved Jennifer, the outcome felt hollow. No sentence could bring her back. No verdict could erase the pain of what she endured. The community held one final vigil, not of hope this time, but of remembrance. Candles flickered against the night as neighbors whispered prayers. Recalling the gentle young teacher who had touched so many lives. Jennifer's story became more than just a case in the files of law enforcement. It became a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how the most ordinary day can unravel into tragedy. Her disappearance and death left scars on the town that would not fade easily. The mystery had been solved, the truth uncovered, but the echo of her absence remained haunting, sobering, and unforgettable.